Hi, good morning, everyone. So we were discussing about the alternate dispute resolution mechanisms in the last class. We have discussed about the tribunals and the Lok Adalats as well. Now let's proceed further and talk about the performance of the Lok Adalats in the country. So as we have discussed that Lok Adalats are an alternate dispute resolution mechanism which works on the principle of conciliation, and the idea is to dispose of as many number of cases as can be disposed of to relieve the burden of the judiciary. And the Lok Adalats have been extremely successful on that particular front. If you see the track record of the Lok Adalats in terms of number of cases that have been disposed by them on single days when they have been set up either across the country or across the states, they have done a commendable job. And there is no doubt that they have been able to indeed relieve some kind of pressure on the judiciary in the country in terms of pendency of cases. But having said that, there are few challenges also that we have come across in the working of the Lok Adalats, especially the fact that we say that justice delayed is justice denied, but there is another proverb which goes around which says that justice hurried is justice buried. So often in the Lok Adalats, the way the procedures are conducted, the way the justice is delivered, it is delivered in a hurried manner. And the parties are not necessarily given a lot of time to make the arguments or counter arguments, and therefore often there is a certain amount of speed that is shown by the Lok Adalats, which is considered as a negative against the functioning of these particular mechanisms, and that has been a point of criticism as well. And then apart from that, we haven't been able to establish as many Lok Adalats as we had expected when we came out with this particular provision in the law. So there is a lot more that is supposed to be done, and especially the states and the district level authorities need to take a number of steps in order to organize the Lok Adalats more frequently. And a few other things as well. So you may just write down performance of the Lok Adalats. Performance of the Lok Adalats. Please write down. They have helped in fulfilling the objectives under Article 39A. If you would remember Directive Principle of State Policy 39 capital A. They have helped in fulfilling the objectives under Article 39A to provide free legal aid and to improve the access to justice for the citizens. And to improve the access to justice for the citizens. You may write down they have been successful in disposing of a large number of petty cases in India. They have been successful in disposing of a large number of petty cases in India. For example, during the 5-year period, between 2016 to 2020, Lok Adalats disposed of almost 52 lakh cases. Lok Adalats disposed of almost 52 lakh cases. almost 52 lakh cases. The State Legal Services Authority, set up under the National Legal Services Authority Act of 1987. The State Legal Services Authority have been regularly organizing Lok Adalats in the states, to relieve the burden on the courts. Full stop. Even the Supreme Court has taken the initiative of organizing national Lok Adalats on specific days in a year to dispose of large number of cases. So those are some of the aspects with respect to the Lok Adalats which we need to keep in mind. Now, what are some of the challenges and the issues associated with the functioning of the Lok Adalats? You may please write down issues associated with the functioning of the Lok Adalats. So the first point which we were discussing, it has been often noticed that the Lok Adalats focus on disposal of cases. Rather than providing justice. Since justice hurried is justice buried, adequate time must be provided. Adequate time must be provided to the parties to make sufficient arguments during the process. Next, please write down, it is often criticized that the views of the Lok Adalats are that the views of the Lok Adalats are shaped by individual views of the conciliators, shaped by the individual views of the conciliators, rather than as a result of settlement between the parties. Rather than as a result of settlement between the parties. So often the conciliator ends up dominating the proceedings of the Lok Adalats more than the views of the party, those who are involved in that particular case. Next, please write down. At times, they have been accused. At times, they have been accused of coercing the parties, of forcing the parties. At times, they have been accused of forcing the parties or coercing the parties to settle a dispute, of coercing the parties to settle a dispute rather than adopting a consensus based approach. Also, the term Lok Adalat itself is actually, it means people's court. So people's involvement should be more. It should not be that of the judicial officers or the conciliators, that they should be deciding the cases like a judge. It is a mechanism that has been created where people can go to and settle their disputes in an amicable manner. So please write down that also. The term Lok Adalat is often considered a misnomer. The term Lok Adalat is often considered a misnomer, as there is very little involvement. Of people. In decision making. As there is very little involvement of people in the decision making. And lastly, please write down, even though they have been set up to provide access to justice to the poor, they have been often accused of favoring the more powerful parties. They have been often accused of favoring the more powerful parties. So, these are some of the criticisms which are there against the Lok Adalats. In prelims examination, there have been a few questions that have been asked related to the ADR, especially Gram Nyalaya के ऊपर एक question आया हुआ है, Lok Adalat पे एक दो questions आए हुए हैं. In the mains examination, the questions that UPSC has asked have centered around Arbitration and Conciliation Act and the changes made in the Act. तो दो बार question आ चुके हैं arbitration और conciliation के ऊपर. One question was asked in the year 2015 or 14 when an amendment had been made to the Act. और फिर 2019 के एग्जाम में भी एक और क्वेश्चन यूपीएससी ने पूछा था मेंस में. So करंट अफेयर्स से भी आपको रिलेट करके चलना होगा, बिकॉज I believe that the Mediation Act of 2023 is an important topic for this year's mains examination. There may be a question that can pop up in the mains examination related to the Mediation Act, but it is important from the perspective of prelims also, because current affairs का topic है and prelims के अंदर भी वो एक simple question बना के दे सकते हैं. But mains examination में तो definitely chances हैं that they may ask you about the utility of the ADR mechanism, some of the criticisms of the ADR mechanism, and all of those things. So this is as far as the ADR mechanisms and the entire topic of the judiciary is concerned. One thing that I wanted to tell you was with respect to the some of the courts being labeled as a court of record. For example, in India, the Supreme Court and the High Courts are considered as court of record. So if you look at Article 129, for example, it tells us that Supreme Court shall be a court of record. So what is the meaning of a court of record? A court of record is a court whose judgments are considered as the law of the land and whose judgments go into the perpetual memory for future reference. That is what a court of record means. What it means is, when I say that perpetual memory for future reference, it means that the judgments of the Supreme Court and the High Courts become judicial precedents. They go into records and then they are referred to by the courts in future while giving their own judgments. That is what a court of record means. So in India, the Supreme Court and the High Courts both are court of records. Okay, so now let's proceed further and let's look at the next topic, and which is the local bodies, the Panchayati Raj institutions, local governance, and municipalities. Any questions that you have related to ADR mechanism, related to the provisions of the judiciary, etc.? Can we proceed further? Okay, so let's talk about the next topic, which is local governance. So local governance it's an important topic for prelims and mains both, because you would see that almost every year there is one question that is asked from the local governance, either panchayats or municipalities. Usually questions have been more around panchayats, but municipalities are also very important, considering urbanization is a very important theme for the exam. And in prelims examination also, they may ask questions related to the basic aspects of the panchayats and the municipalities in India. So first, when we talk about local governance, what does this term mean? It means that the governance that is carried out with respect to local functions or aspects of governance that are important locally when they are carried out by certain bodies, that is what is called as local governance. So the way you get water at home, or the way the public sewage system is managed, or the waste disposal is managed, or the basic hygiene is maintained around the areas in which we live, all of this is a part of local governance. Anything that concerns the population locally will be under the ambit of the local governance. Now, the provision of the constitution that tells us about the various aspects of local governance would be Article 40. So we all know that in Article 40 of the Indian Constitution, Directive Principles of State Policy, the state has been given the responsibility of organizing the local village panchayats in such a manner, to give them such powers, to give them such authority, so that they can function as units of self-government. That is what Article 40 of the Constitution says. So according to Article 40 of the Indian Constitution, according to the Article 40, The state must take measures in order to promote and organize village panchayats in such a manner so that they can function as institutions of self-governance for the people living in the rural areas. This is what Article 40 of the Constitution states. So we can say that Article 40 is the inspiration for better organization and functioning of local bodies, especially the panchayats, village panchayats. तो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में तो इसके रिलेटेड इतना ही मेंशन था, रिलेटेड टू दी म्युनिसिपैलिटीज और लोकल गवर्नेंस, ओनली दिस वाज द प्रोविजन दैट वाज देयर इन द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन. बट आफ्टर इंडिपेंडेंस वी रियलाइज दैट प्रोवाइडिंग अ रोल टू द कम्युनिटी in the development of the rural areas of the country is really important. See, panchayats have been existent in India for time immemorial. Right from the times of the Harappan Valley civilization, where there may have been some bodies that would be ensuring the governance of those cities that were created, to the recent times, even before independence, panchayats or local bodies have been a part of India's governance system. Just that before the Constitutional Amendment Act 73rd and 74th was introduced into the Constitution, these panchayats or local bodies did not function in a very effective manner, and they were not structured properly across the country. There was a lot of variation. And that is what 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment Act did. After independence, we realized that it is important to give a bigger role to the local communities in the development of the rural areas of the country. Which means that the local community should be given a voice. They should be allowed to express their views and opinions with respect to how governance should be provided in the rural areas. They should be given the powers to make their opinions clear on how the various services should be delivered in the rural areas of the country. And that is where the various aspects of community development program come in. So after independence, the government of India launched a program called as the Community Development Program. This program was aimed at improving the community development program. तो कम्युनिटी डेवलपमेंट प्रोग्राम का एम क्या था? ये 1952 में लॉन्च किया गया और इस प्रोग्राम का एम था टू इंप्रूव द इन्वॉल्वमेंट ऑफ द लोकल कम्युनिटीज इन द various developmental schemes and programs to be implemented in the rural areas of the country. The idea was that let the views, let the ideas of governance, of development come from the community, and let the bureaucracy be the tool that should implement those particular ideas that will come from the community. तो community development program में essentially हम ये चाहते थे कि community अपने व्यूज दे, it should give its opinions on developmental schemes and programs in the rural areas, and these views then should be implemented by the bureaucracy. So the bureaucracy should go ahead and implement these particular ideas, of course with the help of the community only. This is what the aim of the community development program was. But unfortunately, the community development program failed in the rural areas of the country. It was not able to achieve the desired objectives. One of the reasons for the same was that the community did not have any chosen or elected representatives. In absence of that, there was no single voice that would express the views of the community to the bureaucracy. So there was no clear-cut hierarchy or path through which the views and the opinions of the people or the community could be expressed to the bureaucracy. One is that. Secondly, the bureaucracy itself was reluctant to share powers with the other organs of with the citizens. So bureaucracy was not willing to, was not open to listening to the ideas, listening to the views of the community. And therefore this entire program failed. Also it was seen that only a few powerful sections within the rural society were able to express their views and opinions, if at all, to the bureaucracy, and the views of large population were ignored in this entire scheme and program. So what was a result was that the community development program created a situation where the bureaucracy implemented its own ideas with respect to development of the rural areas, and it did not have much connection with the ground realities, because they were doing armchair policy making, which essentially means that sitting in office when you make the policies without knowing what the realities of the grounds are, you often end up making mistakes. You often end up creating those policies which are actually not required. So this is what happened in the community development program. So this program proved to be a major failure in ensuring effective participation of the community in bringing development to the rural areas. And as a result, the government formed a committee to examine what are the reasons for the failure of this program and to provide recommendations to improve its implementation or of any similar program in the future. Therefore, the committee that was formed by the government once the community development program failed was named as Balwant Mehta Committee, named after the chairman of the committee. So Balwant Mehta Committee was given the task of examining the failure of the community development program and to provide inputs as to how to improve the implementation of this program going ahead in future. Now, the Balwant Mehta Committee suggested that such programs would always continue to be a failure unless there is people's participation in the implementation of such programs. But people's participation cannot be carried out just like that. For that, you need to have elected representatives of the people. So Balwant Mehta Committee suggested that in the rural areas of country, we must create or set up village panchayats that would have elected representatives. So village panchayats having elected representatives should be chosen by the, should be set up as a part of the recommendations of the Balwant Mehta Committee, and these village panchayat members or elected representatives of the people would be the voice of the people and help in implementation of schemes and programs such as the community development program. The suggestion that was given by Balwant Mehta Committee was that you should not only have panchayats in the villages, but you should also have panchayats at a cluster of villages as well as at the district level. So, Balwant Mehta Committee essentially suggested creation of a 3-tier Panchayati Raj system in India, where at the village level, the village panchayats would exist for each village, where the members of the villages would be elected by, of the village panchayats would be elected by the citizens directly, and then for a cluster of villages, that is at a block level also, there will be an intermediate level panchayat, where again all the people in the villages that come under that particular intermediate panchayat will be directly electing the members, and then you would have the district level panchayat as well, where again all the people living in that particular district in the rural areas would be voting for the election of the representatives of these district panchayats. So this is the mechanism which they suggested should be implemented, and this would help in ensuring that there are now elected representatives who will be expressing the views and the opinions of the people to the bureaucracy, and as a result the implementation of various schemes and programs can take effectively in the country, or at the in the rural areas at the ground level. So this is what the recommendation of the Balwant Rai Mehta committee was. That is, you should create statutory bodies through a law. So these bodies, village panchayats, etc., all of them should be created through a statute, right? So all of them should be created according to a law, and they should be given powers according to the law, and their representatives should be chosen by the people, and these statutory bodies should then have the powers to implement the should have the powers to be the connection between the citizens and the bureaucracy. So this is what the recommendation of the Balwant Rai Mehta committee was, and various state governments went ahead and implemented the recommendations of the Balwant Rai Mehta committee and enacted laws to set up their own 3-tier Panchayati Raj system. Rajasthan became the first state in the country, and they went ahead and implemented or enacted the Rajasthan Panchayati Raj Act, and as a result 3-tier panchayats were set up all across the state of Rajasthan. Various other states also did the same. You must ask, why is it that the state governments are passing the law? Why not the union? Because local governance, according to list 2 of the constitution, falls under the ambit of the states, and that is why the state governments enacted these statutory bodies across the country by making their own laws and creating these bodies. But there was a problem. Because these bodies were created according to a state law, there was a lot of variation in the way these bodies were structured, the way these bodies were composed, as well as the functions that had been provided to these bodies. So there was a lot of variation seen in the structure, composition, and the functions of the panchayats that had been set up across the country. So even though as a result of the recommendations of the Balwant Rai Mehta committee, various states enacted laws to set up their own 3-tier panchayats, but in reality there was no uniformity. Therefore, the experience of the functioning of panchayats varied across the country depending upon how much seriousness had been shown by the state government with respect to the panchayats. Also, depending upon the way the entire powers had been given under the laws made by the state. So there was no uniformity, and there was a lot of variation, and in some places we saw that these panchayats were a success, and in several places we saw that these panchayats that were created turned out to be failures. Right? So this is what, so that in some places they turn out to be a failure, in some places they turned out to be a massive success. So there was a lot of variation. Now, during the 1960s, India faced food crisis, and during the 1970s, early 1970s, India was at the engaged in a war, and then there was emergency. So all this entire agenda of leading the development of the country in a bottom-up manner, where the people in the rural areas should have powers to decide their own destiny, was put at a back burner. 1960s was a really tough time for India. We ended up fighting 2 wars. We were facing huge food crisis as well. And then there was political instability in the country also because of the death of the first prime minister and then the death of the second prime minister. And then there was a lot of chaos within the majority party, which was the Congress at that point of time. And therefore, the government was not able to focus on rural development led by the community. Government was not able to focus on the panchayats, etc. in the country, neither the center nor the states. And as I said, that the mid-1970s, till mid-1970s, situation was again very fragile. 1971, a war with Pakistan. 1975, emergency declared. Inflation was at an all-time high. Industrialization policy had failed, and so many other problems. So all of this agenda of development of the country, rural areas, led by the community, led by the panchayats, as I said, was put on a back burner. But then in 1977, when the Janata Party government was formed under the leadership of the then Prime Minister Morarji Desai, who was a Gandhian, he decided to revive the panchayats in the country. So it was a long-standing dream of Gandhi that India should not adopt the Western model of democracy of parliament, but we should have our own traditional methods of panchayats providing governance mechanisms to the people of the country, which was rejected by the various members of the Constituent Assembly, but was still included as a part of the directive principles of state policy as a compromise. Therefore, when Morarji Desai became the Prime Minister of the country, he decided to revive the panchayats. And as a result, he set up one more committee, which was supposed to examine what exactly has gone wrong with the panchayats in the country and what should be done in order to improve their functioning. And the committee that was set up by the then government was the Ashok Mehta Committee. Ashok Mehta Committee. So what was the recommendations of this Ashok Mehta Committee? They were given the goal that you have to provide us suggestions to revitalize the panchayats in India. That was the task that was given to the Ashok Mehta Committee. Now, Ashok Mehta Committee suggested that we should change the way the panchayats have been structured according to the recommendations of the Balwant Mehta Committee across the states in India. And a better mechanism for the setting up of the panchayats would be that instead of having 3 tiers of panchayats, we should have only 2 tiers of panchayats. So, we should take out the bottom tier, because the village panchayats are not very successful in the way they are functioning. What we should create is just 2 tiers of panchayats, where at the first level we will have the panchayats for a group of villages, which, for example, it had stated can be called as the Mandala Panchayats. So at a block level, at a group of villages level, we could have panchayats called as the Mandala Panchayats, and then at the district level, we could have the district level panchayat. This is one suggestion that was given by the Ashok Mehta Committee. Secondly, they also suggested that earlier political parties were not allowed or encouraged to participate in the elections of the panchayats. But now it recommended that political parties should also be allowed for participation. That would ensure some kind of seriousness with respect to the functioning of the panchayats. Because right now, only individuals in their own capacity are contesting the elections to the panchayats. There is not a lot of seriousness, there is not a lot of importance that is attached to the functioning of these particular panchayats. What we should have is the political parties' participation. So, the other recommendation that was given by the Ashok Mehta Committee for revitalizing the panchayats was the involvement of political parties. Involvement of the political parties in the functioning of the panchayats. Right? So, this is what the Ashok Mehta Committee recommended. There were a few other recommendations also. So, some states went ahead and changed their Panchayati Raj laws according to the recommendations that had been given by the Ashok Mehta Committee. तो अशोक मेहता कमेटी की रिकमेंडेशन के बेसिस के ऊपर कुछ स्टेट्स ने जाके अपनी लॉज को चेंज कर लिया, बट दैट डिड नॉट रियली चेंज अ लॉट ऑफ थिंग्स. One reason being because the Morarji Desai government was in power only for a few months, if you look at it, for just a couple of years. And also, so that was not enough time to bring about any kind of great changes in the way the panchayats function in the country. And also, the ultimate power to decide what kind of changes should be made in the functioning of the panchayats was in the hands of the states only. So, the states did not have much of the inclination to make changes according to the recommendations of the Ashok Mehta Committee. So, the recommendations of Ashok Mehta Committee were implemented in a half-hearted manner by various states, but that did not really yield much of results in the terms of functioning of the panchayats. Thereafter, government set up a few other committees as well. There was a committee called as the Hanumanta Rao Committee that was set up for providing recommendations with respect to rural development. Then GVK Rao Committee was also set up. Then LM Singhvi Committee was also set up that recommended that the only way to ensure the success of the panchayats in the country, the only way to ensure that they are successful, they are uniform in their functioning across the country, is to include the provisions related to the panchayats within the constitution itself. So LM Singhvi Committee made a path-breaking recommendation that the panchayats in the country should be organized in such a manner that the provisions of the constitution should be included and they should function according to the provisions of the constitution. So LM Singhvi Committee की recommendation के basis के ऊपर then Prime Minister of the country took the bold step of introducing a constitutional amendment bill in the parliament to give constitutional status to the panchayats and to the municipalities in India. 64th and 65th constitutional amendment bills were introduced. Even though they could be approved in the Lok Sabha, because the government had such majority, more than 400 seats in the Lok Sabha, but they were not able to do so in the Rajya Sabha. The bills failed in the Rajya Sabha, and therefore this idea of constitutional amendment could not be brought into force. Thereafter, when the National Front government was formed, again in the late 1980s, attempts were made by the then Prime Minister VP Singh and Chandrasekhar Azad to revive these panchayats and to give constitutional status, but they were not able to get enough majority in the parliament for this purpose. Finally, in 1992, when the Congress government was formed under the leadership of the then Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao, the genius of the floor manager that P.V. Narasimha Rao was, he was able to bring about the constitutional amendment bill and it was approved by both the houses of the parliament. By March of 1993, these bills received the assent of the President of India as well as the approval of at least half of the state legislatures in India to come into force as a full-fledged law. So, as a result of all of this, Ashok Mehta Committee, then the LM Singhvi Committee, GVK Rao, etc. and all of those things, few of these things I have already mentioned in the handout. Plus, if you read your material or any of the standard textbooks, you will get whole lot of material on the history of the Panchayati Raj institutions in India. So, as a result, the 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act was enacted by the Parliament, and it came into force in 1993. Right? It became effective from 1993. Similarly, for the municipalities, the Parliament enacted the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act of 1992. तो ये दोनों laws जो थी, they were a game changer, and that gave constitutional status to the Panchayati Raj in India. Right? So this is what we need to keep in mind. As a result of these particular amendments, a few changes were made to the constitution. For example, Part 9A was introduced in the Indian Constitution, as well as Schedule 11 was introduced, that includes the functions that may be performed by the panchayats in the country, and Schedule 12 includes a list of functions that may be performed by the municipalities in the country. Right? So this is one thing that we need to keep in mind. So Darshan, आप इनको किसी को बोलेंगे? मैं बहुत देर से घंटी बजा रहा हूँ. No one has come. So now Schedule 1 and Schedule 12 of the Indian Constitution and Part 9A of the Indian Constitution were included as, and Part 9 also, by the way, sorry. Part 9 and Part 9A. Part 9 relates to the panchayats. Part 9A relates to the municipalities. Schedule 11 relates to the panchayats, and Schedule 12 relates to the municipalities in India. Right? So this is what we need to keep in mind, was the history of the panchayats, etc. And all of this has been mentioned in the handout as well. And as I said, if you read your material, if you read any of the standard textbooks also, you'll find more information. But उसके ऊपर मैं ज्यादा emphasize नहीं कर रहा हूँ, बस इतना basic अभी मैं क्लास में discuss कर रहा हूँ, but इसको खुद से पढ़ लीजिएगा. Please read it on your own. I am not going to be spending time on discussing the history of the evolution of the panchayats in India, but we will discuss more about the core constitutional provisions and the functioning of the panchayats and the municipalities in the country. So let's talk about what are the constitutional provisions with respect to the panchayats in India. यार बहुत देर से घंटी बजा रहा हूँ मैं, क्या हो गया? तुम लोग नहीं सुनता क्या? तुम्हें बजता नहीं है क्या वहां पे ये? अच्छा, तो फिर लगा क्यों रखी है? So constitutional provisions with respect to the panchayats. First, let's talk about the structure and the composition of panchayats. So, the panchayats in India, according to the 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act, have been organized in a three-tier manner. Three-tier structure has been created, same, where you would have village panchayats at a village level. Then for a group of panchayats at the intermediate level, we would have, or at the block level possibly, we would have intermediate panchayats. In some states, these panchayats are referred to as panchayat samitis. In some states, they are referred to as the mandala panchayats. And then at the district level, we have the Zilla Parishad. So this is the three-tier of panchayats that have been, three-tier structure of panchayats that has been created in India as per the 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act. You can check the provisions in Article 243B. There shall be constituted in every state. There shall be. So this is mandatory. This has to happen. Panchayats at the village, intermediate and district level in accordance with the provisions of this part. Notwithstanding anything in clause 1, the panchayats at the intermediate level may not be constituted in a state having a population not exceeding 20 lakhs. So which means that this one is optional. Okay, so this one is optional for those states which have less than 20 lakhs population. So in states having less than 20 lakhs population, they may not create intermediate level panchayats. 3 लेवल ऑफ पंचायत एग्जिस्ट करेंगी. अब इन पंचायत के मेंबर्स कैसे इलेक्ट किए जाएंगे? एवरी विलेज पंचायत, इफ यू लुक एट आर्टिकल 243, subject to provisions of this part, the legislature of a state may by law make provisions with respect to the composition of panchayats, provided that the ratio between the population of the territorial area of the panchayat at any level and the number of the seats in such panchayats to be filled by elections shall, so far as practicable, be same throughout the state. All the seats in a panchayat shall be filled by persons chosen by direct elections from territorial constituencies in the panchayat area, and for this purpose each panchayat shall be divided into territorial constituencies in such manner that the ratio between the population of each constituency and the number of the seats allotted to it shall, so far as practicable, be same throughout the panchayat area. So, a few things that we need to keep in mind. हर पंचायत को constituencies में divide किया जाएगा, right? Every panchayat, as it says, shall be divided into territorial constituencies such so that the population of each constituency and the number of the seats allotted to that should be as much as possible be same throughout the panchayat area. So essentially every constituency should have as much of the same population as should be possible. Also it says that the number of seats allotted in panchayat to be filled by election shall, and the ratio of the population should be, as far as practicable, be same throughout the state. तो इसका मतलब ये है that let us say that if in a particular village there is 10,000 population and there are 10 seats that have been allocated as a part of the panchayat. In a village that would have 5k population, there should be 5 seats. I hope that this is clear. So the number of seats that are allocated should to a panchayat should be, the ratio of that to the population should be same throughout the state. But this can vary from one state to another, which means that in some states you may have panchayats representing a large population and in some states panchayats representing less population. For example, in some states it may be that for 5 seats you have 5,000 population. In some states it may be that for 5 seats you have 10,000 population. So that would vary from one state to another. Anyway, so how would the members of these panchayats etc. be chosen? The members of the village panchayats would be chosen by the electorate at the village level. तो विलेज के अंदर जितने भी लोग अडल्ट होंगे and those who are on the electoral roll of the village, they would be choosing the members of the village panchayats through elections. So members of village panchayats should be elected by the village electorate directly. That is one, right? Secondly, the members of the intermediate panchayats should also be chosen directly by all the people living in that area which covers the intermediate panchayat. So intermediate panchayat will basically include multiple villages. So सारे villages के लोग जो हैं, they will directly again choose the members of the intermediate panchayat. So let's say if the electorate of village 1 elected their own village panchayat, then the electorate of village 2, village 3, village 4, etc. would be choosing the members of the intermediate panchayats put together. And similarly, at the Zilla Parishad or at the district level panchayat, members of all the villages or the electorate of all the villages would again be directly choosing the members of the Zilla Parishad. Right? But apart from this, there can be other representation in the panchayats as well, at the village level, intermediate level, and at the Zilla Parishad level. So, in case of the intermediate panchayats, there can be some other members. In case of Zilla Parishad, there can be some other members other than elected members. But before we discuss that, it is important to understand that every village panchayat would be, or every panchayat for that matter at any of the three levels, would be headed by a chairperson. So a village panchayat would have a chairperson. Now, according to the provisions of the constitution, how the chairperson should be elected has been mentioned in the, has to be determined by the state law. So, the chairperson of the village panchayats may either be elected directly by the village electorate or among the members of the village panchayat by themselves. So by and among themselves, which means that members of the village panchayats can among themselves vote and choose one person as the chairperson, or it may take place as a direct election also, where people will make two votes. One, they will select who will be their panchayat representative, and secondly, they would also choose who their sarpanch or the village chairperson, panchayat chairperson is going to be. तो actually होगा क्या कि हर village को भी smaller constituencies में divide किया जाएगा. See, that is how the elections will basically happen. तो क्या होगा? Let us say that this is one particular village. अब एक village को भी छोटी छोटी कॉन्स्टिट्युएंसी में डिवाइड किया गया है ना, और हर कॉन्स्टिट्युएंसी अपना एक रिप्रेजेंटेटिव चूज करेगी थ्रू डायरेक्ट इलेक्शंस. सो देयर विल बी रिप्रेजेंटेटिव 1, रिप्रेजेंटेटिव 2, रिप्रेजेंटेटिव 3, एक्सेट्रा. राइट? सो देयर विल बी representatives that will be chosen of each of the villages in the of the panchayat. So आप अपने representatives choose करेंगे. Then these representatives among themselves will choose a chairperson of the panchayat. या तो एक तरीका ये हो सकता है, और the other will be that there will be one vote that will be made by people for choosing their representative, and one vote they will make for choosing the chairperson of the panchayat. Right? So this is to be determined. Whether this will happen or this will happen is to be determined by the state law. So the manner of election of the chairperson of the village panchayat may vary from one particular state to the other, depending upon the law that has been made by the legislature of that particular state. Is that clear to everyone? Then, as far as, so अब क्या होगा कि multiple villages के हर village का अपना अपना एक सरपंच होगा. Now, the law 73rd Constitutional Act provision says that intermediate panchayats, apart from having directly elected members, may also have, may, which means that it will depend upon the state law, may also have ex officio members who will be the chairpersons of the village panchayats. So, intermediate panchayat में, apart from the directly elected members, the state legislature by law may provide representation of chairpersons of village panchayats. Chairpersons of village panchayats. Plus, it may also have the members of legislative assembly, members of legislative council, and members of parliament, those who are representatives of that particular constituency or those who are from that particular area in the block. So this is optional to be decided again by the state law. ये फिर optional है. These two things, they are optional, that are supposed to be determined by the state law. I hope that this is clear to all of you. So you can see that in clause 3 of 243C, please read that once. Clause 2, 243C. The legislature of a state may by law provide for representation of the chairpersons of panchayat at the village level, in the panchayats at the intermediate level, or in the case of a state not having panchayats at intermediate level, in panchayats at district level. But do you see that it says legislature of a state may by law, है ना? तो अगर आप इसको closely पढ़ेंगे, chairpersons of panchayats at village level, in the panchayats at intermediate level, और अगर intermediate level की panchayats नहीं exist करती हैं, तो the chairpersons of the panchayats at the village level may be given representation in the panchayats at the district level. But this is supposed to be determined by the state law. Secondly, the chairpersons of panchayats at intermediate level, in the panchayats at the district level. तो अब एक और चीज देखिएगा. Every intermediate panchayat would also have its chairpersons. So how would the chairpersons of the intermediate panchayats be chosen? That is the question. So the answer to that is that the chairpersons of intermediate panchayats are to be chosen through indirect elections. What does that mean? The elected members of the intermediate panchayats will select among them one person as the chairperson of the इंटरमीडिएट पंचायत. ये बात समझ रहे हैं? सो इंटरमीडिएट पंचायत के अगर हम चेयरपर्सन की बात करें, एज आई मेंशन्ड हियर, दे विल बी चोजन बाय इनडायरेक्ट इलेक्शन, विच मीन्स दैट बाय एंड अमंग द इलेक्टेड members you would have a chairperson of the intermediate level panchayat. Similarly, the chairperson of Zilla Parishad would also be chosen in the same manner. तो इससे एक बात पता चलती है, village panchayat chairperson, how that will be elected can vary from one state to another. But intermediate level panchayat and Zilla Parishad panchayat chairperson would be chosen in same manner consistently across the states. Now, what is interesting and important to note here is that one, the chairpersons of village panchayats may be given representation in the intermediate panchayats by the state law, and chairpersons of intermediate panchayats may also get representation in the जिला परिषद. सो आपने एक कनेक्ट बना दिया है. इसका देखिए रीजन क्या है. विलेज पंचायत के जो चेयरपर्सन्स हैं, अगर आप उनको representation देंगे in the intermediate panchayats, if you give representation to the chairpersons of the village panchayats in the intermediate panchayats, then the intermediate level panchayats would come to know of village specific issues and make policies accordingly. Similarly, if the district level panchayats would have chairpersons of the intermediate level panchayats as a part of their body, that would also help them in ensuring that the block level issues are specifically addressed in the district level panchayat meetings. That is why in district level panchayats also, that is in the Zilla Parishads as well, the membership would be like this. One, there would be directly elected members. Secondly, in the Zilla Parishad, there can be possibly chairpersons of intermediate panchayats, plus they may also, apart from the chairpersons of intermediate panchayats and directly elected members, they may also include again members of parliament and members of state legislatures, including legislative assembly and legislative councils. So for that, let's read again further. The legislature of state, I am reading clause 3 again, may by law provide for representation of the chairpersons of the panchayat at the village level, in the panchayats at the intermediate level, or in the case of states not having panchayats at intermediate level, in the panchayats at district level. Second, of chairpersons of panchayat at intermediate level in the panchayats at district level, as we just discussed. Of members of House of People and members of Legislative Assembly of the state representing constituencies which wholly or partially comprise a panchayat area at a level other than village in such panchayat. इसका मतलब क्या है? That members of Legislative Assembly and members of the Parliament from House of People may be chosen as members, may be given representation in the intermediate or in the district level panchayat, but not in विलेज लेवल पंचायत. ये बात समझ में आ रही है? इसका मतलब ये है कि फॉर एग्जाम्पल लेट्स से दैट देर इज अ एक्स कॉन्स्टिट्युएंसी, लेट्स से फॉर एग्जाम्पल सम रूरल कॉन्स्टिट्युएंसी, लेट्स से गोरखपुर, राइट? सो इन गोरखपुर कॉन्स्टिट्युएंसी whoever is the chosen member of House of People to the Lok Sabha, that person may also be made either a chairperson, made a member, ex officio member of the Zilla Parishad as well as that of the intermediate level panchayat. Similarly, for member of Legislative Assembly as well. And then all the members of the Council of States and member of Legislative Council of the state where they are registered as electors within the panchayat area at intermediate level, in panchayat at the intermediate level, and at a panchayat area at district level, in panchayat at the district level. तो अब देखिए, interesting thing is that अगर आप राज्यसभा के member हैं, let's say from Rajasthan, how would it be decided that in which particular panchayat, district or intermediate, you can be a ex officio member? आप तो पूरी state के representative है राज्यसभा में, you don't belong to any particular constituency. So your constituency cannot overlap with the village or with the block or with district. Then how will it be decided? On the basis of your status as a voter. So जिस भी district में या जिस भी block में आप registered voter हैं, there you will be a member of either the intermediate or the district level panchayat. I hope that this is clear. But all of these provisions are supposed to be decided according to the state law. तो इससे एक बात clear हो रही है. Village panchayats will consist of only directly elected members and they will consist of an indirectly elected or a directly elected chairperson. Clear? Secondly, intermediate level panchayats would consist of directly elected members plus it may consist of chairpersons of the village level panchayats and MPs and members of state legislatures. And district level panchayats, you may have firstly the directly elected members plus you may have the chairpersons of the intermediate level panchayats, or maybe chairpersons of village panchayats also if intermediate level panchayats do not exist, and you would also have members of parliament and members of state legislatures as a part of these particular bodies. I hope that this is clear. Now if you see further, the chairperson of a panchayat, I am reading clause 4. Chairperson of a panchayat and other members of a panchayat, whether or not chosen by direct election from territorial constituencies in the panchayat area, shall have the right to vote in the meetings of the panchayats. And then the chairperson of the panchayat at the village level shall be elected in such manner as the legislature of the state may by law provide. तो ये state decide करेगी, direct होगा या indirect election होगा. And the panchayat at the intermediate or district level shall be elected by and from amongst the elected members of the panchayats. So tell me something, can a member of parliament be a chairperson of the Zilla Parishad? Can member of parliament be chairperson of Zilla Parishad? अभी तो पढ़ा यार, कैसे यस क्या बोलते हो, पढ़ो तो उसे। हाँ, समझ में आया कि नहीं आया? यार आज 40th क्लास है, अगर मेरे को आपको एकदम उंगली पकड़ के पढ़ाना पड़ रहा है ना अभी भी कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के प्रोविजंस, तो लानत है मुझ पे और तुम पे, दोनों पे। मुझ पे इसलिए क्योंकि मैं तुम्हें 40 क्लासेस के अंदर भी ये सब नहीं सिखा पाया, और तुम पे इसलिए कि मैंने इतनी मेहनत करी, उसके बाद भी तुम वहीं के वहीं हो जहां तुम पहली क्लास में थे। अभी भी कोई यस लिख रहा है उसको। डू यू फाइंड दी डू यू अंडरस्टैंड व्हाई आई एम सेइंग दैट नो इट इज नॉट पॉसिबल? पहली बात तो इसका आंसर इज नो। डू यू अंडरस्टैंड दैट members of parliament or members of state legislature cannot be chairpersons of intermediate or district level panchayat? Why? Because it is written that the chairperson of a panchayat at the intermediate level or district level shall be elected by and from amongst the elected members. Amongst the elected members, is MP an elected member of intermediate panchayat? Is MP an elected member of a district level panchayat? He's an ex officio member, so he cannot be chairperson. Do you understand that? क्या बोलूं मैं अभी, मतलब what is there to say anything? Anyway, so this is as far as the composition of the, ये देखो अभी कोई कह रहा है among the members, अबे among the elected members भी तो लिखा है। कुछ तो ऐसा करो कि मेरे को भी मतलब महसूस हो कि मैं गधों को नहीं पढ़ा रहा हूं। Anyway, so this is as far as the provisions related to the composition of the panchayats is concerned. So again repeating, panchayats at the district level will consist of directly elected members, plus it may consist of the chairpersons of the intermediate level panchayats and MPs and members of state legislatures. The last two categories both as ex officio members. Intermediate panchayats, directly elected members, plus the last two categories that we discussed in case of the district panchayats. But here you will have chairpersons of village panchayats, plus members of parliament and members of state legislatures. And they would again be ex officio members. Village panchayats would consist only of directly elected members, and chairperson would be either directly or indirectly elected according to the state law. Is that clear to everyone? Now, in order to ensure more inclusive functioning of the panchayats in the country, we included provisions related to reservations in the panchayats as well. And those have been mentioned in Article 243D. Article 243D. सब चीजें स्पून फीड करके कोई फायदा नहीं है, मैं बता रहा हूं आपको, राइट? आप लोग अगर अपनी एबिलिटी डेवलप नहीं कर सकते हैं, डिस्पाइट ऑल द एफर्ट दैट हैज बीन मेड टू टीच यू राइट आउट ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन, बिलीव मी, this is not going to be good for you in the exam. Why? Because questions in the exam will not come out of what I have taught or what any other teacher has taught. Questions would require you to apply the concepts that we have learnt in the class. Straight, direct questions नहीं आएंगे। ऐसे हलवा क्वेश्चन नहीं आते एग्जाम के अंदर कि जो आप पढ़ के गए बस वैसा ही उसने पूछ लिया, वो नहीं पूछेगा। वो इनडायरेक्ट क्वेश्चन पूछेगा, घुमा के क्वेश्चन पूछेगा, एप्लीकेशन बेस्ड क्वेश्चन पूछेगा। अगर वो एबिलिटी आप में नहीं है तो आप इस एग्जाम को टाटा बाय बाय कह दीजिएगा अभी से। बट हैविंग सेड दैट,
each one of you has common sense, each one of you has the ability to develop that skill, but वो आपको observation अपनी बनानी पड़ेगी. You will have to observe, you will have to read very carefully, you will have to start applying the concepts. And how will you do that if you don't attempt previous year questions? That is why I keep telling again and again and again and again 100 times. If you are not attempting previous year questions as we are covering the topics, you are simply wasting your time. Because आप क्लास तो अटेंड कर रहे हैं, आपको क्लास में कुछ कुछ समझ में भी आ गया, पर आपको पता ही नहीं चला कि उसको अप्लाई कैसे करना है, तो आप कुछ नहीं कर सकते एग्जाम के अंदर. और ये अलग से नहीं होता है कि पहले सारा सिलेबस खत्म कर लेते हैं फिर क्वेश्चंस करेंगे. दैट नेवर हैपेंस, राइट? यू हैव टू डू इट साइमल्टेनियसली. In fact, as I have told you multiple times, you should start the preparation of any topic by looking at previous year questions related to that topic first. And then you should read that topic and then you should go back and solve those questions. How many of you have access to previous year questions? आप में से कितने लोगों के पास previous year questions हैं topic wise? तो उसको सजा के रखा है क्या भाई घरों पे? उसकी पूजा किया कीजिए, रोज धूप अगरबत्ती ले लीजिए एंड उस पे रोज फूल चढ़ाइए ऑबिचुअरी के तौर पे. क्या कर रहे हैं उसका यूज कीजिए, उसको अप्लाई कीजिए. प्लीज अंडरस्टैंड दैट. तभी आपको ये रीडिंग बिटवीन द लाइन समझ में आएगा. दैट्स व्हेन यू विल सी कि अच्छा इलेक्टेड मेंबर्स कह रहा है वो. बट फॉर दैट यू हैव टू डू दैट गाइज. आई कांट teach you every possible thing. Please understand, it's not possible for any teacher to do that. This syllabus is absolutely humongous and vast. मेरे को अगर 100 क्लासेस भी दे दी जाए वो भी कम पड़ेंगी to cover the entire syllabus. That's the fact of the matter. Therefore, your attempt should be that you do a lot of self-study, you do a lot of self-analysis on your own, sharpen those skills. No one is born with those skills. आपको कोई आइंस्टाइन का आईक्यू नहीं चाहिए टू डू वेल इन दिस एग्जाम, बट मेहनत जरूर चाहिए. यू नीड टू डेवलप दैट एंड दैट विल ओनली कम विद योर एफर्ट्स, नॉट एनीवन एल्सेज एफर्ट. डोंट एक्सपेक्ट दैट थिंग्स विल हैपन ऑन देयर ओन. अपने आप से कुछ नहीं होगा. मेक अ शेड्यूल, स्टिक टू दैट शेड्यूल. आई हैव बीन टेलिंग यू सिंस द बिगिनिंग. This is high time now. I really want to tell you that you people are in the most productive phase of your life. This is perhaps the 100th time that I am telling you this. Don't waste your time. Not about this exam or not. See, qualification of this exam or not is anyway a very different thing altogether. The fact is that whether you will qualify or not is not something which depends only on your hard work. But I repeat it again, unless you work hard, you will not qualify this exam. And for that, you have to constantly improve. You have to constantly make an effort every day to become a better version of yourself. Every day you should learn something. Every day you should improve your observation power. Every day you should improve your application skills. Every day you should read the constitution, look at geography, maps, or whatever your subject is, and sharpen your skills further. That is the only way to succeed in this exam. And therefore you should write more, you should solve more previous year questions. Lot of students come to me and they say कि सर पढ़ तो लिया है, अब रिवाइज कैसे करें? अब ये मैं कैसे बताऊं आपको कैसे आप रिवाइज करें? This is not something which I can tell you, no. This is something that you have to decide what works for you. आपके लिए क्या काम करता है ये तो आप डिसाइड करेंगे. Some people revise by only writing. Some people revise by reading again and again. Some people revise by reading multiple sources. ये तो आपने डिसाइड करना है क्या करना है. How it's going to work for you. How your brain functions. I can't be telling you that. People expect कि आप कुछ शॉर्ट में बता दीजिए. One student came to me from the other batch yesterday and she was telling me कि सर मैं 5 बार फेल कर चुकी हूँ एग्जाम, अब मैं 6th बार दे रही हूं, पहले तो मैं यही सरप्राइज था कि आप 6th अटेम्प्ट में फाउंडेशन कोर्स अटेंड कर रहे हो, चलो ठीक है, जो वॉट एवर थिंग। देन शी सेज कि सर आप मुझे बता दीजिए कि मेरे को समझ में नहीं आ रहा मैं क्या गलती कर रही हूं, व्हाट इज गोइंग रॉन्ग। एंड नाउ इमेजिन हाउ कैन आई टेल यू जस्ट लाइक दैट व्हाट मिस्टेक आर यू मेकिंग। देन शी इज लाइक नहीं आप शॉर्ट में बता दीजिए कुछ। क्या बता दूं शॉर्ट में? मैंने उसे बोला मेहनत करो जाओ, शॉर्ट में बता दिया जाओ। व्हाट कैन आई टेल यू इन शॉर्ट? डोंट एक्सपेक्ट सम पर्सनल गाइडेंस, प्लीज बिलीव मी, अंडरस्टैंड दैट इट्स नॉट पॉसिबल। आई वेरी क्लियरली स्टेट दैट टू स्टूडेंट्स। मेरी गलती नहीं है, ये पूरा सिस्टम ही ऐसा बना हुआ है। अगर मेरे ऊपर 10,000 स्टूडेंट लाद दिए जाएंगे एंड देन आई वुड बी एक्सपेक्टेड टू प्रोवाइड पर्सनल गाइडेंस टू देम, इट्स नॉट पॉसिबल। मेरे पास मेंटल स्पेस ही नहीं है वो करने का, किसी के पास भी नहीं है। हो सकता है कि थोड़े बहुत कुछ स्टूडेंट्स को हम गाइड कर दें, बट आई कांट गाइड एवरीवन पॉसिबली। हाउ मेनी ऑफ यू हैव रिटन आंसर्स टू प्रीवियस ईयर क्वेश्चंस? और बैचेस में बहुत सारे लोगों ने मेरे को प्रीवियस ईयर क्वेश्चंस के आंसर लिख के दिखाए, आपने कुछ, आपके बैच में भी कुछ लोगों ने दिए। हाउ मेनी ऑफ यू एक्चुअली डिड दैट, अवेल्ड ऑफ दैट अपॉर्चुनिटी? फिर लोग कह रहे हैं नहीं सर क्लासेस खत्म होने के बाद आपको मेल कर देंगे हम। मेरे पास टाइम नहीं है वेरी फ्रैंकली कि मैं आपकी मेल्स चेक करके वो पूरे आंसर्स देखूं और फिर मैं भेजूं। क्या मेरे को मिल रहा है उससे एक्स्ट्रा? व्हाट एम आई गेटिंग आउट ऑफ इट? You should have availed of that opportunity while the classes were going on. You should have written the answers. You should have shown to me. आपको खुद लिखने चाहिए थे प्रीवियस ईयर क्वेश्चंस के आंसर, मेरे को लाके दिखाने चाहिए थे कि सर हमने ये लिखा है, आप बताइए, आप मेरे को फीडबैक दीजिए कुछ। इफ यू डोंट अवेल ऑफ दैट फैसिलिटी, मैं थोड़ी ना आपके पास आऊंगा अपने आप, मैं क्यों अपना काम बढ़ाऊंगा? मेरे को कौन सा कुछ एक्स्ट्रा मिल रहा है इसके लिए? प्लीज अंडरस्टैंड दैट। इफ यू पीपल विल क्वालिफाई दिस एग्जामिनेशन, फायदा आपका है, मेरा थोड़ी ना है। मैंने क्या कर लेना है आपके IAS बनने से? मेरी कौन सी जिंदगी में सुधार आ जाएगा? प्लीज अंडरस्टैंड, आई एम नॉट जेन्युइनली बॉदर्ड अबाउट whether you qualify this exam or not. I'm being very serious. I am only bothered about that I should be able to teach the subject the way I can in the best of my ability to you people and ensure that in this subject at least you are comfortable. That is what all I can do. Qualification of the exam or not, ये थोड़ी ना मेरे हाथ में है, ये तो आपने डिसाइड करना है आपने कितनी मेहनत करनी है किस सब्जेक्ट के अंदर। सो दिस इज भाई, कुआं प्यासे के पास अपने आप चल के नहीं चले जाता है। You understand that? The well doesn't go to the thirsty. The thirsty has to go to the well. If you don't make an effort, if you don't write answers, if you don't come up and discuss that, sir, this previous year question, this is what is the answer mentioned in the official key of UPSC, I am not able to get this correct, please tell me. That would have been a different matter. But ये तो आपको करना है ना. How can you expect me to do that? It's not possible. Earlier I used to discuss some of the previous year questions etc. also in the class, but the problem is that most of you don't read before coming to the class. Most of you just come with blank faces to the class. You have absolutely no clue about the topic that is going to be taught in the class. You expect that you will learn everything in the class only. So that is not possible. It's practically not possible that you can learn everything in the class. तभी मैं बार बार कहता हूं पहले से पढ़ के आइए, आपको पढ़ के आना था पहले से. Then it becomes more relatable. It is easier to understand in the class. And अभी भी मैं बता रहा हूं आपको, whatever remaining classes for any of these subjects you must read before you come to the class. Otherwise you will not absorb anything in the class. आप बस पहली बार सुनेंगे and कुछ fascinating सा लगेगा, but you will not be able to retain it for long. Class should be a second revision for you. Third revision should be then self-study done again after the class while solving the questions. That is the mode of strategy of preparation that you should have. I have been telling this from day one. But still many fools come to me and they say कि sir अब revise कैसे करें? अरे revision should have happened in the class only. You should have read things beforehand. आप इस एग्जाम को बहुत हल्के में ले लिया आप लोगों ने. That is the problem. You people think that हो जाएगा अपने आप कुछ तो भी, something will happen. Nothing will happen. You have to make the effort. Man has to make the effort, right? Your luck, God, destiny can only help you to a certain extent only if you make the effort. Please understand guys. It's very important. और don't waste your time. अगर आप ये मेहनत करने की कैपेबिलिटी नहीं रखते हैं तो छोड़ दीजिए फिर. मैं तो बहुत साफ साफ बोलता हूं. ये बुरी लगती है बात, बट सच्चाई यही है, बेटर है ये. मैं ये नहीं कह रहा हूं कि आपकी कैपेबिलिटी नहीं है. to qualify this exam. Each one of you can qualify. मैंने खराब से खराब स्टूडेंट को भी क्वालिफाई करते देखा है एग्जाम. खराब का मतलब academically those who were not so good, those who may not have done well in 10th, 12th or college or whatever, they have done well in this exam. That clearly proves that you don't need to be the sharpest, you don't need to be the most intelligent, you don't need to be having IQ of Einstein, but you need to work hard. There is no other way. And for that you need to have capability to work hard. If that capability or that will is lacking in you to work hard, then no one can help you. So you only have to do that. No one else will come and prepare for this exam for you. मेहनत आप ही की तरफ से होगी और किसी की तरफ से नहीं. और ये हम ही अपने अराउंड बाउंड्रीज बनाते हैं. We only confine ourselves by the boundaries that we draw. You can work hard, right? You have to decide. Anyway, so 243D, reservations in panchayats. It was important that panchayats should be made inclusive. Various sections of the society had been kept out of the governance structures in India in the past, and it was important to include them as a part of the functioning of the panchayats. And that's why reservations have been provided in the panchayats. One is that reservations have been provided for women. In panchayats, at least 1/3 of the seats, that is, at least 33% of the seats must be reserved for women. Not just that, but even the position of the chairpersons in the panchayats, at least 33% should be reserved for the women. But this is at least 33. In some states they have gone ahead and taken the reservation to even 50%. So in some states 50% reservations have been provided to the women in the village panchayats, in the district panchayats, intermediate panchayats, according to the law made by the state legislature. Apart from it, reservation provisions have also this is mandatory. Okay, this is not optional. 33% minimum is mandatory. Secondly, the reservations may also be provided for the SCs and STs. How much reservation? This will be directly proportional to the population of these communities in that particular panchayat. Right? And what you need to keep in mind is that within the SC/ST reserved seats as well, वन, एक तो SC/STs के लिए भी ये चेयरपर्सन्स की पोजीशंस रिजर्व की जाएंगी, अगेन डायरेक्टली प्रोपोर्शनल टू देयर population in that panchayat, plus within the SC/STs also there should be at least 33% reservation for SC/ST women, which means that let's say if 10 seats are reserved in a district panchayat for SCs, then at least 3 of those seats, 3.3 of those seats so to say, which would mean at least 4 seats should be reserved for the scheduled caste women in the district level panchayat. So, interesting point is that women should overall have at least 33% reservation, but within the specific reservation for SCs and STs also, women should have 1/3 of the share. So, within SC/ST reservation as well, there should be at least 1/3 seats reserved for the SC/ST women. I hope that this is clear as far as Article 243 and reservations in the panchayats are concerned. Now one more thing. Reservations may also be provided to the OBCs in the panchayats. But this is optional for the states, which means that states by their law would decide whether the other backward classes would also be provided reservations in the panchayats or not. The quantum of reservations for the OBCs would again be in direct proportion to the population of the OBCs. in that particular panchayat. Recently, Supreme Court has struck down the provisions related to the OBC reservations in the state of UP in the panchayats. The reason for that was the Supreme Court stated that reservations for the OBCs in the panchayats should be not determined on the basis, so for providing reservations to OBCs in the panchayats, you must prove their backwardness. It's important that the state with data in a quantifiable manner proves the backwardness of the OBCs, the other backward classes, for providing them reservations in the panchayats. But backwardness of the OBCs should not be determined on the basis of social and educational criteria. आप social और educational criteria के basis पे backwardness नहीं decide कर सकते. Which means that, let's say, if a particular group has been provided reservations in educational institutions under the OBC category, because of their social and educational backwardness, they cannot be given representation or reservations in the panchayats on the same criteria. The state would have to prove that they are politically backward. So the court has stated that for the OBCs, it is important to prove political backwardness for the state. तो स्टेट को ये प्रूव करना पड़ेगा. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, पॉलिटिकल बैकवर्डनेस का क्या मतलब है? दैट लेट्स से देयर इज अ पर्टिकुलर क्लास और लेट्स से देयर इज अ पर्टिकुलर कास्ट विच यू वांट टू पुट इन ओबीसी कैटेगरी एंड प्रोवाइड देम रिजर्वेशंस इन दी पंचायत्स. तो आपको उस कास्ट की सोशल और एजुकेशनल बैकवर्डनेस नहीं प्रूव करनी है जैसे मंडल कमीशन ने करी थी. You will have to prove their political backwardness. वो कैसे prove होगी? You will have to show that they are inadequately represented in the politics of the state or in the local bodies of the state. For example, if this caste has, let's say, 20% share of population in the state, but they represent only 1% of the positions in the panchayats or in the politics of the state. So that can mean that these people are underrepresented in the politics of the state and therefore they are politically backward. So social and educational backwardness cannot be used as a criteria for the OBCs to be provided reservations in the panchayats, is what the court has stated, and therefore struck down the provisions of the reservations in panchayats for the OBCs made in Uttar Pradesh. Is that clear to everyone? So you can see reservation of seats. Seats shall be reserved for SCs and STs in every panchayat. Number of seats to be reserved shall bear as nearly as may be same proportion to the total number of seats to be filled by direct election as the population of SCs in the panchayat area or scheduled tribes in the panchayat area. Then not less than 1/3 of the total number of the seats reserved under clause 1 shall be reserved for women belonging to SC or the ST community. Then further it says not less than 1/3 of the total number of seats to be filled by direct election in every panchayat shall be reserved for women, and such seats may be allocated by rotation to different constituencies in a panchayat. Now my question is, would the women have 33% reservations in district level panchayats or not? Women have to be provided 33% reservations across various levels of panchayats. SC, STs have to be provided reservations in panchayats across various levels of panchayats. Do you understand that? Similarly, the OBCs also, if reservations are being made, they have to be provided reservations across the levels of panchayats. But there is one exception to the provisions related to the reservations of the panchayats, and that you may find in the provisions of Article 243M, Clause 3A. Nothing in Article 243D relating to the reservations for the scheduled caste shall apply to the state of Arunachal Pradesh. So, what you need to keep in mind is that reservation provisions for the scheduled castes under 243D should not be applicable to the state of Arunachal. This is an exception which has been made in the law itself. So these are the provisions related to the composition, the structure, and the reservations within the panchayats. Reservations also have to be made of the chairperson's offices as such. Is that clear to everyone? Right? So this is what we need to keep in mind as far as the reservations is concerned. Now, let's discuss one more aspect of the panchayats, and then we'll go into a break and continue after the break. Once elected, what is going to be the tenure or duration of panchayats? So, the Constitution in Article 243E is telling us about the duration of panchayats. Every panchayat, unless sooner dissolved under law for time being in force, shall continue for 5 years from the date appointed for its meeting and no longer. So, firstly, the duration of a panchayat shall be normally 5 years unless dissolved sooner. What will be the conditions under which earlier dissolution of a panchayat may be carried out will be determined by a state law. So normally they would have a duration of 5 years, tenure of 5 years. They will continue to be in the office for a duration of 5 years unless they are dissolved sooner. And another thing which we need to keep in mind is that earlier dissolution, as I said, will be decided by the law of the state legislature. Under what circumstances earlier dissolution can take place, ये state law decide करेगी. I hope that this is clear to all of you. Secondly, let's say if earlier dissolution does take place of a panchayat. So suppose कीजिएगा earlier dissolution happens for a panchayat. Then the question is, what will be the tenure or the duration of the newly elected panchayat? Right? So there are two circumstances here. In case of earlier dissolution, if the remainder of the tenure of the previously dissolved panchayat was less than 6 months, then in that case the newly elected panchayat shall get a fresh full term of 5 years. But if the remainder of the period of the previous panchayat was more than equal to 6 months, in that case the newly elected panchayat would only get the tenure of the remainder of the previously dissolved panchayat. लोकसभा या लेजिस्लेटिव असेंबली में क्या होता है? अगर नया लोकसभा या नया लेजिस्लेटिव असेंबली इलेक्ट होता है तो उसका टेन्योर क्या होता है? Always 5 years. But here there are two conditions or two situations. If the remainder of the tenure of the previous panchayat was more than 6 months, then in that case the newly elected panchayat will only get a tenure of the remainder of the previous panchayat, remainder of tenure of previous panchayat. But if the newly elected panchayat has, or the previous panchayat had less than 6 months of the remainder of tenure, the newly elected panchayat shall get a full tenure of 5 years. A question was asked by UPSC in the mains examination of 2016 related to this particular, in the prelims examination, sorry, related to this concept. Among multiple statements that they had given, one statement was this, that the remainder of the tenure of the newly elected panchayat shall be equivalent to the remainder of the tenure of the previous panchayat. Some of the students thought that no, what kind of provision is this? It makes no sense, because in legislative assembly and in the house of people, the members get full 5-year tenure, तो वो यहाँ पे भी होता होगा, but here situation is different. Is that clear to everyone? इसका देखिए आइडिया ये है कि इससे इलेक्शंस को डिस्करेज किया जाए बार बार. क्यों? क्योंकि जो नई पंचायत बनेगी उसको पूरा 5 साल का टेन्योर नहीं मिलेगा. So this will basically discourage frequent elections in the panchayats. That is why this particular provision was made. Is this clear? So this is mentioned in 243E. Every panchayat, unless sooner dissolved under any law for time being in force, shall continue for 5 years from the date appointed for its first meeting and no longer. No amendment of any law for time being in force shall have the effect of causing whatever. And then an election to constitute a panchayat shall be completed before the expiry of the duration specified in clause 1, before the expiry of period of 6 months from the date of the dissolution, provided that where the remainder of the period for which the dissolved panchayat would continue is less than 6 months, it shall not be necessary to hold any elections under this clause for constituting the panchayat for such period. यहां से वो डिराइव हो रहा है कि मतलब आपको 6 महीने से कम का अगर टेन्योर है बचा हुआ, तो उसके लिए आपको इलेक्शंस करवाने की जरूरत नहीं है फॉर दैट 6 months period. A panchayat constituted upon dissolution of a panchayat before the expiration of its duration shall continue only for the remainder of the period for which the dissolved panchayat would have continued under clause 1 had it not so been dissolved. So here what you need to keep in mind also from this is that when would the elections for the panchayats be conducted? The elections for the panchayats would be conducted before the end of tenure of panchayat, if the panchayat completes its 5-year tenure. In case of completion of 5 years tenure. But it also says that the elections to the panchayats should be conducted within 6 months if dissolution takes place before 5 years. Is this clear to everyone? ये बात समझ में आ गई? वहीं पे लिखा है. तो इलेक्शंस वैसे नॉर्मली पहले ही कंप्लीट कर दिए जाएंगे बिफोर द एंड ऑफ द टेन्योर ऑफ द सिटिंग पंचायत. बट अगर डिसोल्यूशन होता है बिफोर द एंड ऑफ द टेन्योर ऑफ द पंचायत, इलेक्शन शुड बी कंप्लीटेड विद इन 6 months ऑफ द एंड विद इन द इन केस ऑफ कंप्लीशन सॉरी क्या लिखा है, विद इन 6 months if dissolution takes place before 5 years and before the end of the tenure of the panchayat if the panchayat completes its 5-year tenure. Is this clear to everyone? Right? Any questions, any doubts? Duration of panchayats, reservations, composition, structure? पहले तो क्वेश्चन सोच लो. Ask once properly, no? Think about it, what you want to ask. Huh. Sir, what the hell are you saying? First frame the question, that's why I told you, and then ask it, na? सोच तो लो अपने दिमाग में क्वेश्चन, देन ओनली आस्क, राइट? एनीवे, एनी अदर क्वेश्चंस दैट यू हैव? सोच लो सर, थिंक अबाउट इट, आस्क मी आफ्टर द ब्रेक, नो प्रॉब्लम. हाँ बताओ. What happens? I have not come to that. We'll come to that. You tell me if you have any question related to this. Don't rush ahead now. Any questions related to this? Duration of panchayats, reservations, composition, structure. This is clear to all of you. For the provisions of the municipalities, same provisions exist. Municipalities also same for elections, duration. For the municipalities, same provisions exist for reservations also. Only thing that differs in municipalities is composition and structure. Their composition and structure is different from that of panchayats. But reservation provisions, provisions related to elections, duration, all of them are same for the municipalities as well. So I will not be repeating them in case of municipalities. Is that clear to everyone? Right? We'll go into a break right now, and after the break, we will continue with some of the other aspects of the panchayats. Right? For example, disqualification for the members of the panchayat. What are the functions that are supposed to be performed by the members of the panchayats, etc. And then talk about municipalities, and then talk about the analytical issues related to the functioning of the panchayats and municipalities in India. Okay? I'll see you in a few minutes. Yes? Sorry? The state will decide by law. State by law has the option of deciding whether chairperson of the village panchayat should be given representation in the intermediate panchayats or not. So that will be a prerogative of the state. Is that clear? ना, so ये उनका discretion है. हाँ बोलो. न्यू इलेक्शन होने तक 6 मंथ बाकी है मतलब? अरे भाई 1 मिनट रुको ना, पहले उसको बोलने दो. हाँ क्या? क्या बोल रहे हो? हाँ बोलो. Dude, what the hell are you doing here? Please ask a question properly, no, at least. What the hell are you saying? Can you? हाँ बोलो, please. हाँ. Sir, I don't know what you are saying. I am just explaining concept to you. Please don't ask me question unless you have framed it properly. Simply understand. यार ये इतना क्या तुम इसमें तगड़मबाजी लगा रहे हो? सिंपल है बाबा. अगर जब पंचायत को 5 साल का टेन्योर मिलता है इलेक्ट होने पे, if it gets dissolved before 5 years tenure, listen to me properly. If it dissolves before 5-year tenure, and if the remainder of the period, let's say it gets dissolved in 4 years, what is the remainder of the period? The panchayat that will be elected newly will get only, if the remainder of the period was less than 6 months, then in that case the newly elected panchayat would get 5 years tenure. In other words, if the remainder of the period of the panchayat was 6 months, there will be no elections conducted to choose a panchayat for those 6 months. Rather, you will choose a panchayat, but that will give 5 years tenure. This is very simple. Like, Why is that confusion there? क्या है बताओ अब. भाई मेरे को समझ में नहीं आ रहा तू क्या बोल रहा है. तूने 6 बार पूछ लिया, ठीक है, मेरे को समझ में नहीं आ रहा. लिख ले उसको और फिर बाद में पूछ लियो, ठीक है. तुम्हें समझ में आ गया सर? हाँ बोलो. हाँ हाँ, फ्रॉम द फर्स्ट मीटिंग. ऐसे ही होता है सर, लोकसभा भी ऐसे ही होता है. 5 ईयर फ्रॉम डेट ऑफ इलेक्शन नहीं होता सर. 5 ईयर फ्रॉम द फर्स्ट सिटिंग ऑफ द लोकसभा ही होता है 5 टेन्योर. ठीक है, आई विल सी यू आफ्टर द ब्रेक. हाँ सर बोलो, क्या क्वेश्चन है तुम्हारा अब? हाँ बोलो आगे. हाँ sir, you will, the 5 years is counted from the date of the first sitting of the panchayat. Huh. Sir, why the hell are you making all of this so complicated in your head? No, you don't tell me later. I'm telling you something right now. You are unnecessarily complicating stuff. I have told you this. Have you understood this? So then just let it be. No, why are you complicating things for yourselves? Why are you making riddles in your mind? Why are you creating these entire cobwebs in your mind and unnecessarily confusing yourselves? The 5 years is counted from the date of the first sitting of the panchayat. So when the panchayat will be considered, when the elections, whenever they happen, it doesn't matter whenever the elections happen. The tenure of the panchayats will be decided from the date they sit first time. Simple. Why are you complicating things, sir? Anyway, now this is as far as the provisions related to the reservations, compositions, structure, etc. of the panchayats is concerned. Let's talk about the provisions related to disqualification of the membership of the panchayat. 243F. A person shall be disqualified for being chosen as and for being a member of panchayat if he is so disqualified by or under any law for the time being in the force for the purpose of the election of legislature of the state concerned. So what it means is, when the law will come into place, the disqualification of the members of the panchayat will take place according to the law that applies to the members of the state legislature for their disqualification, which is nothing but ROPA. But only thing here is that in case of state legislature, you are disqualified from contesting the elections of the state legislature if you are less than 25 years of age. But here the provision is different, because it says that provided that no person shall be disqualified on the ground that he is less than 25 years of age if he has attained the age of 21 years. So what does that tell us? The minimum age for contesting the elections to the panchayats is not 25, right? And if he is so disqualified by or under any law made by the legislature of the state. So the point is, when the law will come into force, this law will come into force, 73rd, disqualification of a person will be decided according to the provisions of ROPA, the same law that is applicable to the disqualification from the state legislature. But thereafter, the state also by a law may lay down provisions for disqualification for the membership of the panchayat. For example, Haryana a few years back made a law which disqualified people from contesting the elections to the panchayats if they did not have the requisite educational qualifications. The idea was to ensure that panchayats should have people with a minimum educational qualification. Also, there were provisions that were laid down that if you have more than 2 children, then also you shall be disqualified from contesting the elections to the panchayats. These provisions were contested in the court, and finally the court declared them to be unconstitutional. Initially the court had upheld the validity, but later on the court held these provisions to be unconstitutional. See, when you are imposing limitations on the basis of education for contesting the elections to the panchayats, the idea is that you must have educated people in the panchayats. But then my question is, why should such a criteria not be placed for the parliament or the state legislature? Why only for the panchayats? Is there any educational qualification criteria for the position of the president, vice president, prime minister of the country, chief minister of a state? Then why should it be only for the panchayats? One is that. Secondly, who says that having an educational degree is a proof that you can be a good administrator or you can be a good representative of people? There have been various people in the past, those who have been excellent representatives of the people without having any of the formal degrees. So the point is that whether you are a good administrator or not is not necessarily dependent on whether you have an educational qualification or not. If that was the case, we should only have had people, those who have PhDs or Harvard degrees in the parliament and in the state legislatures. Why are we doing so for the parliament and the state legislatures on the basis of whether the people, whether the person chosen is truly a representative of the people or not? So that should be the criteria and not anything else. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say here. Secondly, the other aspect also is that when you impose such qualifications, you are actually discriminating against the marginalized sections of the society even more. For example, women in the Indian society have deliberately not been allowed to receive education. And if you impose a limitation that they can't contest the elections if they don't have a certain educational degree or educational qualification, you are further creating situations in the society that fewer women will enter into politics, and therefore lesser women in future also will get educated. We have to break this chain, and for that we need larger number of women in the politics for them to promote women's education and not the other way. If you put educational qualification as a criteria, then a number of SCs and STs also would fail to contest the elections for the panchayats because they would not have got the opportunity to study or to receive education. But that should not stop them from being representatives of their people and raising the voice of their people and asking for more rights for them, even in terms of education. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. There are other challenges also that emerged. Now, putting this limitation that there should be only 2 children and more than 2 children will lead to disqualification from the membership of the panchayat. Now, the idea is to impose some kind of population control. The idea is to set the population policy right of the government. But see, this is nothing but a coercive measure. Whether people should have 2 children or 1 or 3 or 4 or more should be a matter of choice, and they should be educated about the same. Awareness should be created about it. They should be given enough tools for family planning and not force them to have 2 or more or whatever number of children. Also, some weird cases also came up in certain places. One person was already having 1 child. The wife delivered the child, but this time it was twins. So that person got disqualified. Now, this is not his mistake that he was only attempting for the 2nd child, but it ended up being twins. Or if someone had a triplet, at times there can be triplets also. Then what happens in that case? So these are some challenges which exist with those kind of laws. And my question, as I said again, is if you are imposing such limitations on the membership of the panchayat, you must make provisions then for parliament. You must not have people in the legislature, those who are illiterate. Why should members of the state legislative assemblies be illiterate then? Why should Prime Minister be illiterate? Why should Chief Minister be illiterate? Why should members of Parliament be illiterate? Why should there be no educational criteria for President, Vice President, CAG, and so many other important positions in the Constitution? Why only for the panchayats? Right? So that is something which we need to keep in mind. Anyway, so that's the provisions related to the disqualification for the membership of the panchayat. So what we can keep in mind is, (243F) disqualification for membership of panchayat. So at the time of commencement of 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act, disqualification shall be same as that of members of state legislature. Right? So the disqualification shall be same as that of the members of state legislature, which is provisions under essentially ROPA, Representation of People Act of 1951. But disqualification for the membership of the panchayat later on shall be determined as per state law. Only thing which we need to keep in mind is that less than 25 years of age should not amount to disqualification. Is that clear to everyone? Right? So these are the provisions related to the disqualification of the panchayats, a disqualification for the membership of the panchayat. Now, and this varies from one state to another, as I just told you, Haryana mein kuch hai, kisi aur state mein kuch aur hai. Anyway, now let's talk about what are the functions, powers, responsibilities of the panchayats. What are the functions, powers, responsibilities, authorities of the panchayat? So for that we will look at the provisions of Article 243G. The panchayats, they say, is subject to provisions of this constitution. Legislature of a state may by law endow the panchayats with such power and authority as may be necessary for them to function as institutions of self-government, and such law may contain provisions for devolution of powers and responsibilities upon panchayats at the appropriate level, subject to such conditions as may be specified therein with respect to. So specifically what we need to understand is that the powers, duties, responsibilities of the panchayats are to be determined by state law, and it is the state law that should determine what functions etc. that they can perform. And not only that, but they would also determine that what functions, what authority, what responsibility would be performed by each tier of panchayat in the state. This activity or this process of allocating specific functions to each tier of panchayat shall be called as, this should be referred to as activity mapping. इसको activity mapping कहा जाता है, which is what activities, what functions will be performed by each of the tiers of panchayat. इसको हम activity mapping कहते हैं, ठीक है. Now, what are the specific aspects that have been mentioned by the constitution where the panchayats can be given powers, authorities by the state governments? It says that preparation of plans for economic development and social justice and implementation of schemes for economic development and social justice as may be entrusted to them, including those in relation to matters mentioned in Schedule 11. So one, the panchayats would have a very important role to play for preparation of plans for economic development and social justice. They will prepare plans for economic development and for social justice. And secondly, they would also be responsible for implementation of schemes and programs for economic development and social justice, including those functions which have been mentioned in Schedule 11. So, apart from other schemes and programs that they would implement, if there are schemes and programs related to the functions mentioned in Schedule 11, it says that they may also perform the implementation of schemes and programs specifically with respect to these functions mentioned in Schedule 11. So this tells us that panchayats basically have two important activities or functions. One is planning. People should decide what should be the infrastructure development in the villages. People should decide what should be the programs that should be implemented in the villages. People should decide what should be the various aspects of the schemes and programs run by the government. And secondly, they are also going to be having a role of an implementation agency. So they are both playing role of an implementation agency as well as planning. But exactly what will be their role will depend from one state to another. In some states we see that they play the role of planning as well as implementation. In some states we see they only perform the planning role. In some states we see they only perform the implementation role. Some of the states that have been able to give both the functions to the panchayats and devolve a lot of powers to them would include states such as Kerala, Karnataka, West Bengal, Gujarat. These are some of the states that are the best performers when it comes to devolution of functions and authorities to the panchayats so that they can function truly as institutions of self-government. But many other states have not devolved their powers and functions to the panchayats. This is what you need to keep in mind. They have been reluctant to share powers with the panchayats. Is that clear to everyone? We will discuss more about it. So these are the functions to be primarily performed by the panchayats. One, planning function. Second, implementation function. And specifically with respect to the list of functions mentioned in Schedule 11 of the Constitution. See, Schedule 11, whatever functions have been mentioned, are actually originally the functions of the states. But we have created a list in the Constitution that the states may give all or some of those functions to the panchayats to perform in terms of planning and implementation both. Is that understood? So ये एक indicative list है. See, center cannot determine everything that the state should do, no? So center has only laid down the provisions of the law in a framework way to tell the states that you have the freedom to decide what exactly should be the powers, functions, duties of the panchayats. But we will just indicatively tell you that these are the functions that you may give. So if you look at the functions, there is a list of 29 functions in Schedule 11 of the Constitution. Look at some of those functions, because there was a question also that was asked by UPSC just a couple of years back related to the functions that can be performed by the panchayats. They gave 3-4 statements and you had to pick which of the combination of these statements was correct. So agriculture, including agricultural extension, land improvement, land reforms, minor irrigation, animal husbandry, fisheries, social forestry, farm forestry, minor forest produce, small scale industries, खादी विलेज इंडस्ट्रीज, रूरल हाउसिंग, ड्रिंकिंग वाटर, फ्यूल फॉडर, इसको एक बार जाके घर पे पढ़ लीजिएगा एंड केवल पढ़िएगा मत, सोचिएगा, थिंक अबाउट इट दैट ओके व्हाई इज इट दैट ड्रिंकिंग वाटर इज देयर इन द लिस्ट, बिकॉज ऑफ कोर्स it is a local issue, so it's best that the village panchayats only take care of it. Okay, cultural activities is also mentioned there, so think about it. That means that if there are any fairs, festivals that are supposed to be organized in the villages, panchayats may be given functions with respect to them. Markets and fairs, so if there are any markets that are supposed to be organized, their administration, their functioning in the villages, panchayats can be given the powers. They may be given powers to provide primary and secondary education through schools. So in the rural areas, they may be given the powers to run schools as well, primary and secondary, not the senior secondary or not higher education institutions, because that then will be more complicated. Then they may be involved in technical training in vocational education. That means that if there is some skills that are supposed to be provided to the people in the rural area, then the panchayats must be involved in that. So think about it like that, okay? Just don't read. For example, PDS likha hai, so panchayats may be given the responsibility of running the PDS scheme, for example. They may be given the responsibility of managing the fair price shops in the villages. You get the point? They may be given the responsibility of identification of beneficiaries of the PDS scheme, right? Then they will be given the responsibility of health, sanitation, primary hospitals, dispensaries. See, primary hospitals, primary health care centers, not tertiary, not advanced, but primary ones, where basic vaccination, basic healthcare services are being provided. They may be given the powers to ensure the welfare of the weaker sections of the society and take measures for promotion of the scheduled caste and the scheduled tribes. So think about it, that they can possibly make schemes or programs for upliftment of SCs, STs. They can run some kind of awareness programs to remove untouchability in the villages, in the rural areas. They may be given the responsibility of construction of the non-conventional energy resources. So think about it, right? That in the rural areas, if solar energy has to be promoted, if wind energy has to be promoted, if people have to be motivated to set up small turbines, they may be given that kind of power as well. So think when you are reading this, just don't read the list. Why I say that is because UPSC, in the question that it had given, it had mentioned some of the functions, and one of the functions which it had mentioned was marriage and customs related to marriage, etc., as functions to be performed by the panchayats. Now, if you see, nowhere you will find that marriage, customs, etc., and all of these things can be controlled or taken care of by the panchayats. This remains to be a subject under the states. So that's how you have to think. अभी ऐसा कई बार question पूछ लेता है वो exam में. You cannot remember this list. See, it's not possible to remember this list. But what you can is that you can broadly remember when you draw some relationship in your mind. अच्छा ये लिखा है कि rural housing, okay, that makes sense, that the panchayats may be given the responsibility of, let's say, identification of people, those who don't have houses, and then they may be given the responsibility of construction of the houses for such people. They may be given money by the state or by the center. So this is what you need to keep in mind. ऐसे पढ़िएगा इसको. Anyway, so the functions that are supposed to be performed by the panchayats. Now, in order to run effectively, any body needs finances. So provisions related to the finances of the panchayats have been mentioned in Article 243H. Right? Provisions related to finances of panchayats. Provisions related to finances of panchayat. So, it says that the legislature of a state may by law authorize a panchayat to levy, collect and appropriate such duties, tolls and fees in accordance with such procedure and to such limit. So firstly, the panchayats may be given by the state law powers to levy, powers to collect and appropriate different type of taxes, duties, etc. But whether or not the state legislature does that is their prerogative. We have seen that many states have failed to give taxation or the powers to levy duties, etc. to the panchayats in the country. As a result of that, the panchayats usually depend upon transfers that are made by the center or by the states. They don't have their own sources. Transfers which are usually made are conditional transfers. Transfers which are made are usually attached with certain conditions. Tied funds milte hain. So panchayats are really not having much freedom to decide what to do and what not to do. They simply do what the state government thinks should be done, which is not what the objective of the law was. The objective of the law was that people should decide what is best for them. That is what real democracy will be. People should decide whether roads should be constructed or not, or whether we should spend that money on construction of hospital, whether we should spend money on construction of a community hall or on construction of a school is a decision that the community should take. They should convey that to the panchayat, and panchayat should have enough money to implement those wishes of the people. This is what we exactly wanted. See, because you may want so many things to be done by state or center. Do they do it? No. Why? Because you can't really have that kind of connect in such a huge number. आप अगर चाहें भी, you may want, for example, that here on Pusa Road there should be a maybe an pedestrian subway or some kind of a foot over bridge should be created so that so many students, so many people come here, they should be able to move across the road very easily. That would help in easy movement of the traffic also. But where will you go and tell this to? Whom will you tell this to? You don't have the phone number of Prime Minister, you can call him up. You don't have the phone number of the Chief Minister of Delhi and can call him up. But if you had a municipal member, he would be more accessible to you because he caters to lesser population. So you could always approach him and tell him that, see, this is what we want. More people would approach him. Then after that, or maybe he may do these meetings regularly with the people of his constituency. People may express their needs. Then he will raise that demand in the municipality. There will be some funds available to the municipality, they will implement it. But अभी क्या हो रहा है? State बता रहा है कि we are giving you money for beautification of the road. वो बोल रहा है सर मेरे को ब्यूटिफिकेशन के लिए पैसे नहीं चाहिए. लोग बोल रहे हैं कि फुट ओवर ब्रिज बनाओ, आप ब्यूटिफिकेशन के लिए पैसे दे रहे हो. मैं क्या करूं इस पैसे का? एंड फिर जबरदस्ती के अंदर ब्यूटिफिकेशन किया जा रहा है रोड का. जबरदस्ती. People don't want beautification. They are saying first improve the basic services. So the problem is that the panchayats and the municipalities in India don't have sources of their own of revenue. They have to depend upon the state and the center. And they come usually with their conditions. So they don't really have freedom. In a sense that panchayats हैं, elected representatives हैं, उनके पास लोगों की डिमांड भी है, पर वो कुछ कर नहीं सकते. So they are functionally disabled. Why? Because neither they have the funds, और दूसरा आपने उनको इन फंक्शंस के रिस्पेक्ट में पावर भी नहीं दी है. सो यू हैव सेड कि नहीं नहीं, ये म्युनिसिपैलिटी नहीं बनाएगी इस फुट ओवर ब्रिज को. फुट ओवर ब्रिज विल बी कंडक्टेड बाय पीडब्ल्यूडी. अब आपने कोई एक नई बॉडी खड़ी कर दी, उसको दे दिया काम ये. सो व्हाट विल म्युनिसिपैलिटी डू देन? दैट्स द थिंग. वी विल डिस्कस ऑल ऑफ दीज थिंग्स. सो दिस इज वन. सेकेंडली, देन इट सेज दैट assign to panchayat such taxes, duties, tolls and fees levied and collected by state government for such purpose, etc. So now, one, they may give the powers to them to collect, levy, etc. and all of that. Plus, state may also assign taxes collected by the panchayats, by the states, to the panchayats. So ये भी हो सकता है कि स्टेट खुद टैक्स या पैसा कलेक्ट करके कुछ टैक्सेस असाइन कर दे पंचायत को. दिस ऑल्सो इज वेरी पुअर. देन द थर्ड इज प्रोवाइड फॉर मेकिंग such grant in aid to panchayat from consolidated fund of the state. So third way in which the money can come to the panchayat. So this is their own revenue. But own revenue will be determined by the states. This also is in a way revenue which is owned by the panchayats, but again to be determined by state. And third will be that the states may give grant in aid. Just like how we discussed grant in aid under Article 275, they may also make grant in aids to the panchayats out of the consolidated fund of the state. Provide for constitution of such funds for crediting all the monies received respectively by or on behalf of panchayats, and also for the withdrawal of such monies therefrom. Just जैसे कि consolidated fund of India and consolidated fund of state होता है, similarly there may be creation of a consolidated fund of the panchayat also, where all the money that is earned by the panchayats may be put. So there may be a consolidated fund of panchayats that may be created. So these are the sources of revenue for the panchayats, right? The way they can get the money. Now, let's discuss one more thing, which is related to the State Finance Commission. Now, all these things should be decided by the state government on the basis of the recommendations provided by some independent body, autonomous body. See, otherwise what will happen? State government will keep putting in money to or give more funds to those panchayats where their ruling party members are in power, or where like the chief minister belongs to or some minister belongs to. All the activities or the focus of the government may be concentrated at some places. There may be bias and there may be impartiality. So ideally this should be done on the basis of the recommendation. कितने taxes की power दी जाए, कौन से taxes assign किए जाएं to the states, grant in aid कौन से aspect में दिया जाए, consolidated fund कौन से में consolidated fund of panchayats कैसे create. All of these things should be decided by the independent body, and that is what is called as State Finance Commission. So provisions related to State Finance Commission have been mentioned in Article 243I. So it says that the governor of the state shall, as soon as may be within 1 year from the commencement of the constitution and thereafter at the expiration of every 5 years, constitute a finance commission to review the financial position of the panchayats and make recommendations to the governor. So one function that will be performed by the State Finance Commission. So let's now understand what the functions of the State Finance Commission would be. First thing that you must keep in mind is that State Finance Commission should be formed every 5 years. Who the members will be, what their terms of office would be, all of these things will be decided by the state government. Now, functions. One, this State Finance Commission will be making recommendations to review the financial position, or they will review the financial position of panchayats. They will see whether the panchayats are able to meet their expenditures or not, what are the expenditures of the panchayats, what are the sources of revenue for the panchayats. All of those things will be conducted by the panchayats, by the Finance Commission. Secondly, they would also recommend to the governor principles on the basis of which distribution of the revenues between the state and the panchayats of net proceeds of taxes, duties, tolls, etc. leviable by the state may be divided between the panchayats and the states. Now, you remember that Finance Commission of India was supposed to recommend to the state, to the union, how the taxes collected by the union shall be divided between the union and the states from the divisible pool of taxes, right? They would formulate a formula, कितना percentage पैसा पंचायत को दिया जाएगा, किसको कितना दिया जाएगा. Vertical and horizontal devolution would be decided on the basis of the recommendations of the state, the Finance Commission of India. Similarly, State Finance Commission is supposed to recommend to the governor regarding distribution of revenue or distribution of net proceeds of taxes between states and panchayats. Between states and panchayats. Then, determination of duties, tolls, etc. that may be assigned to or appropriated by the panchayats. So, वो जो अभी हमने discuss किया था, that states by law decide which duties, tolls, taxes, etc. may be assigned to the panchayats. That can also be recommended by the Finance Commission, right? And grant in aids to be made by the consolidated fund of the state to the panchayats. So, one is this, they will also lay down what kind of grant in aids may be made to the panchayats from the consolidated fund of the states. They would also recommend that what kind of taxes, duties, etc. may be assigned to or appropriated by the panchayats. Taxes, duties, assigned to the panchayats. And further, what measures should be taken to improve the financial position of panchayats. So, they are supposed to basically recommend devolution, they are supposed to recommend grant in aid, they are supposed to recommend what taxes and duties may be assigned, and what steps may be taken in order to improve the position of the panchayats, and any other matter that may be referred to the Finance Commission by the governor, on which the governor has sought their recommendation. These are the functions that are supposed to be performed by the Finance Commission of the state. Now, what you need to see here is, legislature of a state may by law provide for composition of commission. How many members will be there? What will be the qualification of those members? All of those things will be determined by the legislature of the state. For this they will make a law. The commission shall determine their procedure and shall have such powers in performance of their duties as the state legislature may assign to them. The governor shall cause every recommendation made by the commission under this article, together with an explanatory memorandum to the action taken thereof, to be laid in front of the legislature of the state. So, governor की क्या ड्यूटी है कि जो भी स्टेट फाइनेंस कमीशन की रिपोर्ट होगी, whatever will be the report of the state finance commission, that must be tabled in the state legislature along with what? Action taken report. Remember, in case of Union Finance Commission also this kind of provision existed, that the President of India was supposed to cause to lay down the Finance Commission report in front of the Union Parliament along with an action taken report, which would explain what actions have been taken by the government on the recommendations of the Finance Commission, what actions have not been taken and why they have not been taken. Is that understood to everyone? So these are the functions that are supposed to be performed by the Finance Commission. See, similarly, this same Finance Commission, यही same Finance Commission ये काम भी करती है कि यही काम म्यूनिसिपैलिटीज के लिए भी करती है. Same Finance Commission will review the position of the financial position of the municipalities. They will make recommendations to the governor to division of the net proceed of taxes to the municipalities. They will make recommendations on the grant in aids to be given to the municipalities. They will make recommendations on the taxes, duties, etc. to be assigned to the municipalities. They will make recommendations to the governor for the measures to be taken to improve the financial position of the municipalities, and so on and so forth. Is that clear to everyone? State Finance Commission functions, very similar to the functions supposed to be performed by the Central Finance Commission. Why? Because Central Finance Commission recommends devolution of taxes from the net proceeds to the states and division of that between the states, vertical and horizontal devolution. They make recommendations on the grant in aids to be made by the union to the states under Article 275. They make recommendations to the union, measures to be taken to consolidate the fiscal position of the panchayats and the municipalities in the country. Similarly, here also the State Finance Commission performs the roles. Every finance state should to have its own State Finance Commission. Is that clear to everyone? Now let's discuss about who is supposed to be responsible for conducting the elections to the panchayat. So we have discussed that. अब देखिए इससे एक बड़ी एक चीज क्लियर हो रही है कि हर स्टेट में स्टेट फाइनेंस कमीशन का कॉम्पोजिशन वेरी कर सकता है, क्वालिफिकेशंस वेरी कर सकती हैं. इसका मतलब दे आर फंक्शनिंग एंड वेरी इन वन एवरी स्टेट. ऑल्सो even though the governor is supposed to create a finance commission every 5 years, in many states we have seen that there have been delays in formation of finance commission. See, ideally from 1993, this law came into place in 1993, and finance commission कब से form होना था? From 1994 onwards, which is basically 1 year के within form होना था. So let's say 1994. 1994 to 2024 is how many years? 30 years. In 30 years, finance commission, state finance commissions must have numbered 6 in the states. मतलब अभी तक 6 state finance commission form हो जानी चाहिए थी states में. But in many states, till now, only 3 or 4 state finance commissions have been formed. What does that tell us? That many a times, finance commissions were not formed only by the state government. They did not create the finance commission only, or they delayed the formation of the finance commission, right? So this has been one problem, and plus one bigger problem is that even though 99% of the recommendations of the Central Finance Commission are accepted by the central government, states have often rejected the recommendations of the State Finance Commission. And unfortunately, it has not come under much scrutiny of the legislature also. Because the scrutiny of the legislature will depend upon how much interest the opposition and the legislative member take in the discussion of the action taken report of the government on the State Finance Commission recommendations. And how much interest the people show, how much interest the media shows in that. But if there is not going to be any discussion on the recommendation of the State Finance Commission, then what can we expect, right? So anyway, these are issues that we will discuss as well. Now further, elections to the state, to the panchayats and to the municipalities are supposed to be conducted by a body called as the State Election Commission. Single State Election Commission will exist for conducting the elections to the panchayats as well as to the municipalities. So, State Election Commission provisions have been mentioned in Article 243K. It applies to both municipalities as well as to the panchayats. So, 243K says that the superintendent's direction and control of preparation of electoral rolls and for the conduct of all the elections of the panchayats shall be vested in State Election Commission consisting of a State Election Commissioner to be appointed by the governor. So, State Election Commission would have a State Election Commissioner. This State Election Commissioner would be given the powers. State Election Commissioner को powers दी जाएंगी क्या करने की? To be conducting the elections within the state, would be given the powers to prepare the electoral rolls, etc. So, the functions of the State Election Commission would be as follows. 1. Preparation of electoral rolls. That is, who are the people, those who are going to be voting in the elections, the most important function to be performed by the Election Commission. Same function is performed by the Election Commission of India also. For the general elections to the Legislative Assembly and to the Lok Sabha, and as well as the Rajya Sabha and the Legislative Councils also. Then, secondly, they are supposed to be involved in the actual conduct of the elections as well. Again, see, we could have given this job to the state government also, but then there would have been a problem. State government may have been biased towards the candidates put up by the ruling political party. So we wanted an independent body to be responsible for conducting such an important aspect of the functioning of the panchayats, that is the election of the members of the panchayats. Now, the subject to provisions of any law made by legislature of the state, the conditions, service and tenure of the office of the state election commissioner shall be as such the governor may by rules determine. So basically, what will be the conditions, what will be the service conditions, salaries, allowances, etc. to be enjoyed by the state election commissioner members will be determined by the whom? Governor of the state, but according to a law made by the state legislature. तो गवर्नर केवल रूल्स बनाएगा as per the law which has been made by the state legislature for this particular purpose. 243K, right? Provided that the state election commissioner shall not be removed from his office except in like manner and on the like ground as a judge of high court, and the conditions of the service of the state election commissioner shall not be varied to his disadvantage after his appointment. So there are some provisions in order to ensure the independence of state election commissioner. What are those provisions? That removal will happen in the same manner and on same grounds as that of High Court judge. What are the grounds for removal of a High Court judge? What are the grounds for removal of a High Court judge? Sorry? Yes, proven misbehavior and incapacity, physical and mental. What is the manner in which they are removed? Resolution has to be passed by both the houses of the parliament by a special majority, and then the president has to make an order for the removal. Similar provision will be followed for the removal of the state election commissioner also. So they have been given considerable protection. And second, and a very important thing, is that their salaries etc. cannot be varied to disadvantage after appointment. So that they do not function under any kind of pressure. They do not function under any kind of fear from the state government. So that's what we need to keep in mind as far as the state election commission is concerned. The governor of a state shall, so when requested by state election commission, make available to state election commission such staff as may be necessary for the discharge of the functions of the state election commission. So the point which we need to keep in mind is that state election commission may make request to the governor that I want this much amount of staff for my purpose, and you please allocate me the staff from the state government on deputation. Is that clear to everyone? Now let's talk about the exceptions related to the provisions of the 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act. Exceptions related to the provisions of 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act. These have been mentioned in Article 243M. So there are certain exceptions to it, so let's try to look at it. It says that nothing in this part shall apply to the scheduled areas referred to in clause 1 and the tribal areas referred to in clause 2 of Article 244. So firstly, shall not apply to Schedule 5 and Schedule 6 areas. But there is one more provision which you have to read related to it, which is clause 4 subclause B. Parliament may by law extend the provisions of this part to scheduled and tribal areas referred to in clause 1, subject to such exceptions and modifications as may be specified in the law. So what you need to understand is, even though the provisions of of 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act should not extend to Schedule 5 and Schedule 6 areas, but it is possible for Parliament to make a law and to extend these provisions, extend them to the Schedule 5 and Schedule 6 areas with modifications, exceptions, whatever they may specify. Firstly, tell me, why did Parliament make this provision that the provisions of 73rd should not apply to Schedule 5 and Schedule 6 areas? Yes, because they have their own customs, traditions, firstly, of local governance. उनकी खुद की अपने ancient customs और traditions हैं कि वो कैसे अपने local matters conduct करते हैं. दूसरी बात, we have already created in these areas some other mechanisms according to the constitution also. For example, in Schedule 6 areas, we have tribal elected bodies called as the autonomous district councils. Similarly, for the Schedule 5 areas, we have a body called as Tribal Advisory Council that advises the governor for the administration of such areas. So therefore, we felt that there is no need to unnecessarily impose this on the tribal areas or scheduled areas unless if Parliament wants it to be done. You must also understand why Parliament has been given this power, because we believe that interest of the scheduled tribes can be best taken care of by the Parliament or by the center, not by the states, those who may have their own myopic reasons to not ensure the welfare of the SCs and the STs. I hope you understand. वही जो सेम हमने बिल्कुल स्टार्टिंग में भी डिस्कस किया था, that why is there so much centralization in the Constitution of India? Why? Because one of the reasons is because the constitution makers did not trust the states that they will take care of the weaker sections of the society, including the SCs and the STs. I hope you understand this. अब इसके लिए पार्लियामेंट ने एक लॉ बना भी दिया है to extend the provisions of schedule of 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act to the scheduled areas, not to tribal areas, but to scheduled areas. And the law which has been made by the Parliament is named as the PISA Act, Panchayati Raj Extension to the Scheduled Areas Act of 1996. This is the law which has been made by the Parliament, which extends the provisions of the 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act to the scheduled areas. But इस act में ग्राम सभास को बहुत सारी powers दी गई हैं, right? So we will quickly discuss अभी after this as well what gram sabhas are and what they are supposed to do. Then secondly, there is one more exception which has been provided with respect to this, which is that nothing in this part shall apply to the states of Meghalaya, Nagaland and Mizoram. So it should not apply to Nagaland, Meghalaya, Mizoram. Again, why? Because these are predominantly tribal states where they already have their ancient tribal customs, traditions, etc. And we don't want to disturb that, right? So many of these societies have their own tribal communities and tribal kinship, etc. And all of those things, we don't want to disturb that. So that is one reason. Then apart from it, hill areas in the state of Manipur for which district councils exist under any law for time being in force. So in Manipur as well, there are district councils that exist. These district councils are again bodies that are representatives of the tribal communities in Manipur. So in those areas where district councils exist in Manipur, there also provisions of 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act should not apply. Now let's proceed further. Nothing in this part relating to panchayats at district level, that is Zilla Parishad etc., shall apply to the hill areas of the district of Darjeeling in the state of West Bengal, for which there is already a Darjeeling Gurkha Hill Council. So the district level panchayat provisions should not apply to should not apply to Darjeeling area. Other provisions related to the other levels of panchayats may apply, but not the provisions related to district level panchayat, because there is already a Darjeeling Gurkha Hill Council for that. Then it shall be construed to affect the functions and powers of Darjeeling Gurkha Hill Council. And then we have also discussed that nothing in this article in 243D relating to reservation of seats of scheduled caste shall apply to state of Arunachal Pradesh. This we have already discussed. Also, one more thing. The legislature of the state referred to in subclause A of clause 2 may by law extend this part to that state except the areas if any referred to in clause 1, if legislative assembly of that state passes a resolution to that effect by a majority of the special majority of that house. तो मतलब कि in the state of Nagaland, Meghalaya and Mizoram, other than scheduled 6 areas, provisions of 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act may be extended. But for that, legislative assembly has to give approval by a... So, what we need to keep in mind is that here, these provisions may apply to these states. If state legislature approves by special majority resolution. But you must keep in mind that this would not in ये इसको आप कर तो सकते हैं, but it would not extend to schedule 6 areas in the states of Nagaland, Meghalaya and Mizoram. Meghalaya and Mizoram में there are scheduled 6 areas basically. So वहां पे they won't extend. So these are the basic provisions. Now one more thing that we need to have a look at, and that is with respect to the Gram Sabha. So let's have a look at that once, and then we can call up the class and discuss about the other issues in the next class. So let's look at Gram Sabhas. What are Gram Sabhas? The definition of Gram Sabhas has been mentioned in Article 243. 243 के अंदर अगर आप clause B पढ़ेंगे, then definition of what Gram Sabha is has been mentioned. It is a body that consists of persons registered in the electoral rolls relating to a village comprised within the area of panchayat at the village level. तो Gram Sabhas village level पे exist करती हैं, right? So हर village के लिए there will be a Gram Sabha. Who shall be the people as a part of Gram Sabha? Basically all the adults in the village. इसका तो यही मतलब है ना, all the adults मतलब कि people those who are on the electoral roll, वो कौन होंगे? 18 साल से ऊपर के लोग. All the adults in the village will be a part of the Gram Sabha. Now what are going to be the functions of the Gram Sabha? What kind of functions will the Gram Sabha perform? This is supposed to be determined by state legislature by law. 243A. In different states, Gram Sabhas have been given different powers. In many states, they have been given the powers to identify the beneficiaries of various government programs and schemes. In many states, they have been given the powers to make draft plans and then give them to the panchayats. In many states, they have been given the powers to conduct audit of the accounts of the panchayats. So it depends. That's why 243A says they may exercise such powers and perform such functions at the village level as the legislature of a state may by law provide. Right? So that is one thing that we need to keep in mind as far as the Gram Sabhas are concerned. Okay. So we will stop here. These are all the basic provisions related to the functioning of the panchayats in the country which we need to keep in mind. These are very important for prelims. In mains examination, UPSC usually tends to ask analytical questions related to the functioning of the panchayats. We will have a look at those aspects in the next class, but they have already been provided in your handout. So please, if you have not read the handout, please read them before you turn up for the next class, because in the next class, first we will cover that. Then we will cover the basic provisions related to municipalities. बहुत ज्यादा डिस्कस नहीं करना है because almost all the functions and things are same as that of the panchayats, except composition, structure and functions. Rest everything is same for the municipalities. Then we will discuss issues associated with the function of municipalities as well in India. Then we will move on to talk with respect to the planning aspect. There are district planning committees, metropolitan planning committees, and then we will move on to discuss about Schedule 5 and Schedule 6 in the next class. In the next class, I will also take up the provisions related to citizenship. That is part 2 of the Indian Constitution, Article 5 to 11. And if time allows us, we will also begin with the topic of the CAG. Right? So that is what the agenda of the next class is going to be. We will cover provisions related to citizenship. Then we will take up provisions related to CAG. If time allows us, then we will continue with that in the next class. Then after that, as I told you, the topics that would be left would include the public service commissions, human rights bodies, etc. in India, comparison of Indian constitution with the other countries, and some provisions related to the other constitutional bodies such as the election commission, etc. So that is what we will be discussing in the remaining classes. Okay. Any questions that you have related to the panchayats, composition, structure, reservations, functions, elections, finances, exceptions? These are the broad heads in which we study the panchayat provisions. No questions? Okay, thank you. I'll see you in the next class.